sky's the limit. The truth is on our side. There's no time for worry. Let's show the world our pride. Whether another comes up with a surprise, we all will discover where our fate will lie. On a blue wave, we rise to save the day. Only me, only you can let our hearts sail away on a blue wave.
And welcome to episode 38 of TruBlu Politics with Karen and Anita. Hey, Anita.
Hey, Karen.
So today, Anita and I are fortunate to be joined by Hal Sparks, star of Stage Screen under the production of Mega Worldwide, and can be found at infotainmentwars.com. He is the host of his own show, which you can enjoy on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Substack, and Saturdays on WCPT, 8:20 a.m., Chicago's Progressive Talk Radio from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and on TuneIn Radio. And Hal, I know that only skims the surface of all of your activity.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to say, what else are you doing, Hal? I know there's a lot more.
My credits tend to eat up my entire guest appearances on things. So I tend to, just people should know me just as Hal Sparks, and we'll go from there. We live in the age of Google it, so I feel like I'm okay. That said, I've always felt like people should be impressed by what you actually say when you're speaking, as opposed to where you came from. Like, it's almost like you're hanging on to somebody going, all right, well, he's obviously said some remotely smart things before. I'll stick around and see, perhaps, right? And then you're like, nope, that was stupid. I always thought he was going to say something smart.
He said that one smart thing.
Yeah, right. I obviously a one-hit wonder. I've been intellectually rickrolled. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Right. So, lots to talk about. Obviously, I've been my brain has been tracking what's happening in Iran and Israel right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty scary.
And yeah, I mean, it is the story of our day. Like everything else will be eaten by the ramifications of this over the next, month or so.
Can I ask you a question about that? Do you think that Israel was taking advantage or kind of playing Donald Trump because he was over there trying to make this deal that he thought would get him a Nobel Peace Prize with Iran? Right. And, meanwhile, they're planning on doing this attack. Do you think they actually informed him? Or do you think they would?
No, because I think everybody knows around Donald Trump that even if you consider him a friend, the dumbest thing you could possibly do is share your plans with him because he will spill them to the worst possible people. Iran's primary ally is Russia. They are they're their biggest buyer of military equipment. They buy more drones from Iran than anybody else, and they use them as a regional domino flicker. They don't really side with Iran in its Islamic dreams of domination of the entire Middle East, but they find them to be useful idiots. And they know that if you'll notice, most, if not all, of the Hamas fighters, Hezbollah fighters, Houthi fighters, if you see them carrying a gun, it's an AK-47.
Of course.
And that's not an accident. Also, all the arms transferred from Iran to those three groups over the last, couple of years all went through the base that the Russians seized when we left Syria. When we pulled our troops out, Donald Trump gave that base to Russia. That place has been the junction point. It has been the crossroads of weapons transfers to these proxy groups ever since. And I think in some ways that there's always a question about how much Trump knows because again, even people who think he's on their side often aren't stupid enough to tell him what's going on. And in Russia's case, I think they think they're playing with him most of the time, and they are. Right. So I don't think he's even aware of what they've been doing because he's not curious, just like George Bush. They're these intellectually incurious idiots. And so it's easy to manipulate them. And then by the time they wake up to it, if they admit that they were suckered, they look weak. So he will always stand there like, I knew all along. That's what he's doing with Israel right now. So no, I don't think Israel told him. I think they would be stupid to, because he would tell Russia and Russia would tell Iran.
Well, and all you have to do is look back to the first month of the first occupation when he shared classified information with the Russians in the Oval Office, right? And then
there are dead Israeli agents because of Donald Trump from the first term.
Exactly. And so then, when we know that they have to draw him, pictures in a picture book, for him to understand what's even going on in our own country. And, and so it's really hard to believe that they would share any information about it.
The pictures in the picture book are to tell him what's going on in the world. And that's not even working. They're talking about how they have to.
He's dumb, but remember, he plays dumb. Like when people ask him questions about, the immigration stuff or about, even things that are going on right here, he sits there and says, I don't know anything about that.
Because he doesn't. I don't think that. I don't think he's running the country. My theory is that it's Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller is the actuator for it. He's not the brains behind the thing. He's definitely the guy driving the immigration philosophy.
Right.
But the marching orders are coming directly from the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, and the sort of like this radical group within both of those groups that formed Project 2025. And have this thing, and they're the ones who, through Peter Thiel and all these guys and Elon Musk, assigned him J.D. Vance, and they are just bum rushing all these executive orders through so they can get him before he keels over.
Right. Yeah. He doesn't ever seem to know what's on these executive orders. He's like, wow, look at this one.
That's a big one, eh? That's a big one. That's a big one, eh?
What's this one about staging baby?
Yeah, I know.
It weirdly becomes like a
little
New
kid.
York babushka, like a New York lady, like that's it. You like cookies, huh? Who made those brownies for you?
It's very
weird.
telling. Every time he does those executive orders, and he has to have somebody explain the whole thing to him, and everybody acts like it's this big deal, and it's so transparent. I mean, that is not transparency. First of all, he does all these press, things, but he just lies. That's not transparency.
Nope.
That's the opposite of transparency.
Right. Well, and again, you can't be transparent if you don't know what you're showing. If you're not aware of the details, you can't be transparent. And that's in the old days, you would actively seek plausible deniability. With Trump, it's just he's not interested. He can't be bothered. You had to actively keep. Like Cheney, you could argue, kept George W. Bush away from certain things, so he wasn't playing dumb. He actually was. But Bush knew that was the game, right?
Yeah.
And Reagan's plausible deniability he was an active participant in it. He absolutely knew, like around Iran-Contra and stuff. But he knew that which rooms not to be in when meetings were happening. Right.
He didn't know the details. He knew that, he knew the overall agenda, what was going on.
I would argue with Reagan. He knew the details.
You think so?
Yes, but he got them through other channels. And those would be the ones that were covered by executive privilege, directly from George Bush or directly from his, his Joint Chiefs or something like that on the down low, because they don't have to get that advice could stay secret. So he knows it has to stay secret. So he was never afraid it would come out, especially when, stuff used to work, like now all bets are off. Like, at this point, at one point, like Trump is breaking so many laws. I almost feel like the idea of executive privilege under him should be thrown out as well. Like, okay, if you're going to break all these rules, then why should we honor executive privilege?
It doesn't even matter anymore anyway, because apparently he has full immunity, as long as he can say, oh, I'm doing this for the benefit of the American people or for whatever reason to forward some sort of interest of the American people. We didn't know his motives can't even be questioned.
No. And the thing of it is, too, the Supreme Court, they ruled against him and he's ignoring it. And who's going to enforce it? So
he didn't ignore it. He just slow rolled it. He slow walked it. Like the whole Kilmore Abrego Garcia thing. Right. He eventually got him back.
Right. Yeah. Eventually got him back, and then now they're gonna.
Well, he tried to. Yeah, I would argue that the slow walk on Kilmar Abrego Garcia was about them trying to build a narrative and build a case before they brought them. They knew they had to bring him back, but they had to find some people that they could say were co-defendants, make them turn on him, so that as soon as they brought him back, they could file charges. And they were building that case while he was in jail.
Yeah,
is
that's
essentially what was happening.
Yeah, they were doing the investigation before that for like a month, right? Before he was ever brought back.
Exactly. That's why they were slow walking it, because as soon as he got back, if he sat around for 2 weeks while they drummed up a case, it would be particularly telling. So while everybody was worried about him over there, your attention is on whether he's alive or not. Your attention is on whether he's safe or not, and not on the fact that, like, necessarily why he's being held. And then they could just kind of dump that on everybody when he got back up here.
See, I think he's still afraid of, just completely disregarding the Supreme Court. The lower courts, what he does is those he doesn't care about, because he feels like he's going to get it to the Supreme Court every time, and he does.
So what do you think?
He built there's also a trap that he built the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is largely his, in theory, anyways. And the problem with that is that if he bucks it and says they've turned on him or they're fake, then he's a terrible judge of character and picked a bunch of bad people, and then maggots have to freak out at the people he hired. And then who else is going to want to be his nominee? You'll have a situation where Republican judges, who, let's say he had a chance to replace one of the SCOTUS people, you're going to have a real hard time finding somebody that will toe his line for him. In this, you know what I mean? Like, because they'll take the job, but he's only got a couple of years left and he can't run again, and they'll make sure of it. So whoever would come in, he's not going to have like a Brett Kavanaugh situation. They're going to be like Amy Coney Barrett. They're going to be a heat-seeking missile for one particular issue, and then they're going to hang him out to dry everywhere he's breaking the law, because they still want a country. That's the other, again, this is where ego can sometimes be your friend, because some of these people, he's a self-serving moron, but he's surrounded by self-serving egomaniacs, and they're not necessarily stupid. Anybody who's self-serving and isn't stupid can recognize there's a bit of a long game to be had. Trump doesn't know the long game. He can't see past the end of his belly, so he can't.
He's going to make them irrelevant. He could make them irrelevant. They don't want to be irrelevant. The Supreme Court, I mean, if he ignores the Supreme Court,
same thing with senators, right? This is the same thing with senators, and this is what he's running into with the congressional guys on the budget, on the big BS bill. The reason that he's having trouble with these guys is because he's got one term and he's done. He's feathering his nest. It's really obvious. He's just using this as a money grab, and then the rest of them need to play nice with MAGA so they can get some of the votes. But they own any of the spending. They own the debt after he leaves. He does not. He'll go down as his followers will see him in their mind, and I don't think this will work out the way he thinks, but they think his followers will think the sun shined out of his backside the entire time he was in there. So they'll be left holding the bag, and nobody will go, well, Trump really laid this debt on you. They don't think that's how it's going to work. And they're right, to some degree, but overall, that's what's kicking them into gear. That's what's kicking these the votes in the House and the Senate that are putting the BBB in danger, is because they're going to be there when the bill comes due.
I don't know if it's the debt. The problem is that, the debt to a certain extent, because Moody's has already downgraded our, credit rating, and they're looking at doing it again. And the dollar, if we lose the what is it? What do they call that?
The reserve currency.
The reserve currency. That's going to cause all kinds of problems. We're going to have to start caring about the debt if that happens.
Well, here's the thing. That isn't going to happen. The only danger of the dollar not becoming a reserve currency has nothing to do with the other currencies of the world. It has a lot to do with crypto, which is one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot more pushback against stable coins than you think, of why they're trying to get this regulation through, so that they can have a grip on it. And if they need to dial it back, limit who can put them out, how many can be out at one time, that kind of stuff. Because then you just have everybody printing immeasurable numbers of these things that are allegedly the same cost as a dollar. If you find somebody who's selling them at 30 cents on the dollar, you could screw with the money supply like crazy, and it doesn't take much. So
is there going to be a crash though? Is there going to be like a big crash, like a crypto crash?
Yeah. Well, the crypto has a horizon, and that's quantum computing. Because once you can break the algorithm of how you store and secure them, because they are not physical things, they can be evaporated by a quantum computer. And so already, the belief was for a long time, and Bitcoin took a big hit at one point when it was just
Yeah.
kind of like a meme thing, but it took a huge hit when the first FBI crack happened, when they cracked somebody's wallet and they were able to get the funds that they had stolen or they had used for illicit criminal activity. And once that happened, everyone went, "Oh, wait, the feds can get access to this? Never mind." But as a temporary like hold for money that's kind of just off radar, you're able to put it into this void. And if you can do that with, with under the table money or money that you never, you can allege you never received or whatever, that keeps it out of the tax realm. And once you're dealing in $1 million or more, it's worth it even if you get caught later, because you'll make more money than the fine would be at whatever the standard was at that time.
Okay, but putting aside, okay, go ahead, finish.
Yeah.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just saying the stable coin is linked to the dollar instead of its own stupid magic price that just made up out of nowhere. And that's where you start messing with the dollar as a reserve currency, because it becomes a workaround for available bills that the Fed puts out. And that really messes with things.
But putting aside the crypto problem, okay, he's doing so many things to crash the economy. Like the deportations, the tariffs, just people not wanting to come here. You know, people that it's hurting our economy as far as travel and there's so many different things that he's doing that are hurting just our reputation, which is hurting our economy because people don't want to do business with us. They don't want
to market. It's going to affect my job.
Yes. They're dumping our bonds. I mean, there are so many different things. That's what I think is going to be his undoing, honestly.
I definitely agree. I think one of the things that they are seeking, maybe with the Iran situation and he can't do anything about Russia and Ukraine right now. So there are a lot of things that are out of his control. And the taco thing is a reality. Like Wall Street is treating him like the BS artist that he is. So they're not taking him seriously anymore. There was a lot of volatility in the beginning because they were treating these tariffs like a real thing. But he was ignoring the market anyways, even when it was starting to crash. So these guys were like, we're not going to do him any favors. And all he's doing is creating dips and then having his rich friends buy the dip, because it just, to me, it's clearly market manipulation for the sake of pump and dumping. And anybody around him who talks to him at Mar-a-Lago can get an idea like, Friday we're going to punt on the tariffs. And he'll just throw that stuff around either because he wants them to know or because he's so stupid he can't realize how much money can be made in a situation like that. And these guys are all just taking advantage of it. So that what's happened is a lot of people are going, I'm not going to dump my stock and let somebody buy it for pennies on the dollar and then have to buy it back later. I'm just going to sit on it, ride it out. Treat it like COVID. Trump is being treated like COVID in the second half of 2020 by the market. They're like, it's not going to stay down forever. It's an artificial dump. It has nothing to do with the value of these companies. It's just a shakeup in the world order and what's going on caused directly by this. So it is reasonable, to assume that, like, yes, as president, he has a lot of power, but we've all been over the years kind of disappointed in the lack of power that, say, Obama might have had in a situation, or Clinton might have had in a situation, and that still exists no matter how much Trump wants to do it. The only real damage he can create is the temporary short-term shock damage that some things that were already on their heels can collapse when they get hit, they get blindsided this way. But if anything has any resilience whatsoever, there's an argue that it will, and they know it's coming because they know they're going to be a target and they're aware that he'll come after them. It can benefit them in this kind of media-oriented, worldwide wrestling, World Wrestling Federation kind of attitude that people have, that like, okay, the heel is coming for me, so I'm going to brace myself, and people might be shocked, but I'm not going down. And that happens across a bunch of markets. Like the oil market's going up because of the Israel-Iran thing right now. But there's already going to be a glut of oil anyways this fall, so it's going to dive again. It's not going to stay up. There's no demand. China's demand's going through the floor. If Xi Jinping is still in charge by September of China, it will be a miracle. And
why do you say that?
because he's been ill and they've been shuffling people around him, and the power structure, the sort of next guy in the Pez dispenser is this guy Wang Yang, and then there's Zhang Youxia, I believe, is the other guy who's like the head of the military. Those guys will be the ones who will jockey for basically running the country. Zhang Youxia runs the military, and Wang Yang would be the secretary, the president of China. But Deng Xiaoping, when he was running things, was actually the military leader. He was not the chairman of the Communist Party. He didn't become the secretary. He was the military leader. So he ran it, but everybody thought of him as, nobody thinks there's any difference between Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping's power struggle, even though they were different officers. It's like if in the United States, one year the president was the most important guy and basically called the shots, and the next time the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was calling all the shots. That's how they run over there. And so it really is a power structure. And so he's been on a hard fade for a while. The economy's in terrible shape. Not just the tariff stuff is the least of their worries. They've got like something in the order of like 35 to 40% youth unemployment in big cities. It's bad. It's very bad.
Yeah, I know.
And
what about the trade deal? What about the trade deal with China that we just so-called trade deal?
Gibberish.
I know.
Well, what they went back to was back to the 90-day pause to the numbers they were before that stuff started, before Liberation Day or whatever that nonsense was. So all this is going to go. By the way, all of these tariff things are going to find their way back to where they were. They're all going to go back to being, over the course of a year or something like that, to 2.5% or on average amongst these things for different industries, meaning that you'd have a 6% or 10% tariff on one particular thing, but on everything else there is none. And so it averages out, and that's how most of these things work. The idea that Lutnick is getting all these deals and we're having to deal with so many deals. I got so many, they're all stacking up. Ridiculous. It's just garbage. And what the phone calls they're getting to make deals is like, go back to the way things were. You're ruining your economy and ours. This is dumb. Yeah. And the deal they're going to come to is, okay, we'll go back to normal with you guys. Okay, we'll go back to normal with you guys. And point by point, bit by bit, the money that's being lost. The money that's being lost in jobs, in businesses across the country is in the trillions. And he's like, we're bringing in billions every week. And you're like, yeah, but we're losing trillions every month.
I know. So, and that's just tariff talk. Never mind what Doge has already done. The federal jobs. I mean.
Well, yeah. Okay. So Doge, hashtag Doge is a heist. Doge is and my favorite thing about it, like Elon Musk did this for free, and all the guys at Doge are working for free. Like, yeah, all bank robbers work on spec. There is no such thing as a salaried bank robber. They know they are getting paid in the back end. That's the point. You get paid based on the heist. And that's what they did. Like, you're going to get access to information and data for your little startup or whatever. Go right back to your VC capital guy in Silicon Valley and go, I got an app we're going to sell to defense because I know exactly what, and I've actually I formed my own company and I okayed my own grant proposal while I was in the building. Like, that's the kind of stuff that they did. They're not doing this for free. And so what happened though? What was the actual result? And what caused this dust up, besides the fact that Trump is in the Epstein files? What caused this dust up between these two idiots? What was the dust up? The dust up was they came in promising $2 trillion. Then they pulled back to $1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
Now they're down to $160 billion, which is less than Biden when he came.
Yeah, but
Biden came in after and did. Yeah, he cut. Biden came in. Every president comes in and cuts things in the discretionary spending from their previous president. Unless there's continuity and or it's the second term. And every time they do that, it's a little under $200 billion because that's your slush money as president. That's what you get to move around. But Trump spent all that. So he spent his entire slush fund. So he had to cut from USAID and other things and move that money elsewhere. And he's still out of money. The budget this year is Biden's budget plus somewhere in the order of 220 billion over top of the budget, the $7 trillion budget that we have for the fiscal year.
But they were counting on the Doge cuts. They were counting on that to pay for it, right? For this.
Well, yes, that's why the BBB isn't going to pass.
Right.
Like they'll pass some version or something they can call it, but it's going to be stripped out like crazy because every time they win 10 votes, they lose 20. So and you've got the fiscal hawks against the people who are basically financial realists or live in states like Missouri where half the populace is on the government tit but pretends they're maggot bootstrappers and you know, and those there whether the voter is deluded or not is one thing, but the congressional people and the senators definitely know their state is kept afloat by blue state funds and is way behind in their budget. They know it. Because they've seen it. And so they know they can't, like, they can make a big talk about these cuts, but they can't actually make the cuts without damaging their own state. It isn't going to damage California. It's not going to damage New York. You know,
it's going to damage Texas.
Illinois, right. It's going to damage Texas. It's going to damage Florida. It's going to wreck Louisiana. Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Kansas. Like, they're all going to get pummeled.
Right.
Yep, for sure.
It does make you wonder why they think that they can roll into a state like California and do what they've been doing over the last week and a half. You know, I mean, it's like they're so,
They have to. I'll tell you exactly what that business is about. And having just come back from California, I drove past where the riots were allegedly going on.
Wasn't it all burned down? I heard the city of Los Angeles is gone.
Yeah, I had to drive. I drove around the crater. You know, like it was one of those loop-the-loop things you see motorcycles do in carnivals. You know, I just drove my car around the crater like that. Same thing that happened in Portland. #RIP Portland. But
Minneapolis. Too.
Yeah, right. Too. Yeah, which was gorgeous when we were there for. I went down to 7th. I'm wearing my 7th Street entry shirt today, which is the Princess Club. You know, from Purple Rain.
Yeah.
So in California, the reason why the California thing has to happen, there are a bunch of other, by the way, you know, equal dust-ups with burning cars and that kind of stuff. But the focus on California is that California represents like Democrats. It represents liberal granola, soft. It's always been that kind of whipping boy for the red states. But it pays for the red states. Illinois by itself would be the 20th biggest country financially on the planet. California would be 6th.
Oh, 4th? I thought it was 4th now, behind. They just beat Japan and Britain now. So they're 4th.
Oh, yeah, because they just fell behind. Right. So in Gavin Newsom's time, by hook or by crook, he can brag about the fact that California went from the 6th or 7th largest economy in his time there to the 4th.
Yep.
Right. And there's no, they'll go, well, that's because those guys shrank. Like, well, we didn't, so we stayed up. So it's still true. Anyways, point being is that California is the big whipping post for them because in the same way that Trump went after Biden because he knew Biden was the person that could beat him and why he had to go after him so hard. He's going after Newsom for the same reason. And like maggots and
that's what I said.
Maggots,
he's afraid of Gavin Newsom. He is so afraid of Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is everything he isn't.
Yeah, he's intelligent.
I would argue J.B. Pritzker is charismatic. He isn't too.
J.B. Pritzker is too, but I'm just saying Gavin Newsom does scare him more than anybody.
Yeah, no. Okay, so Pritzker he views like Chris Christie. Pritzker is overweight, so Trump thinks he can corner him by insulting his weight and dismissing him as not telegenic. He fears how telegenic and well-spoken Gavin Newsom is beyond the fact that he's a successful governor. And what you'll have is the situation where, like, if Gavin runs, Schwarzenegger is going to come out and support him. Like, there's going to be a bunch of California heavyweight Republicans and people who were elected to office in the state who will come out and go, absolutely this guy, versus J.D. Vance or whoever they think they're going to run next time. No question. And no amount of maggot screaming about, liberal dystopia, commie, blah, 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 that they always throw around is going to make a dent in Newsom because he's been chipping away at that narrative. He's been going on these right-wing podcasts. He's not afraid to say what he says. He's not afraid to shake off some of the fringier parts of what allegedly is the base. And I say allegedly because I don't think most of those folks vote ever anyways. Right? He's not afraid to make those people mad at him because he knows the choice is so drastic, and he also knows that these are 80-20 issues.
Mhm.
And, again,
But he sits down with white supremacists. You
Yeah,
don't think that's gonna be a problem?
I'm not of the, fringe of our,
Mhm.
spectrum, but
Which,
I
Base.
will say that, him finding common ground with Charlie Kirk on the trans issue and
right.
like we're going to woke. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that that's.
Well, okay. I think that's a great point of conversation. So in the United States, for minors, the discussion about trans kids, whether they should be on puberty blockers or whether they should have gender affirming or disaffirming care, depending on how you look at it, having top surgery, having any kind of surgery, is viewed as an 80-20 issue by the electorate, by the people at large. No matter, and we have a choice in this situation. We can either get really busy convincing the other, 30% to like switch back over, so we at least have a coin flip on this issue and it's not a talking point in the next round. Or you can recognize that there's more depth and complexity to this issue than the activist class in the United States would like you to believe, and that it's not as simple as
No, it isn't.
right.
Can I say, I have a trans son. So
Yeah.
I, as a parent, I understand it's very complex. And I feel
Right.
like though what we end up doing, see, there's this narrative out there that there's this, this group of activists that are pushing for trans rights and all the rest of it. In reality, what it is the right made it an issue. They ran a $200 million campaign on it. Okay. And so then you have the people, the activists, right, that are over here, speaking largely without having trans people in the room with them. And I will say this,
defining the conversation, defining the language, defining the parameters of the conversation. Right.
And I'm going to say, as a parent, when they started criminalizing parents helping in Texas, helping their children get gender affirming care down there, to me, there was a whole bunch of people jumping in the pool and saying, oh, it's a trend and this and that and the next thing. And I'm going to tell you right now, my son came out to me at the age of 16. It was past the time that I thought that if that was going to be the situation, that he would have come out or it would have presented itself. But that's what happened. But this idea, and then there's a bunch of people taking the voices or speaking on behalf or making assumptions and assertions on behalf of trans parents of trans kids that were absolutely unfair and unfounded if you actually speak to us. So
but the problem is not enough people are going to speak to people like you. That's the problem. And we're dealing with an electorate that isn't
really
going to get there. But they're not going to get the information. The best bet, I think, is to just make the point that this, and continuing to make the point that this is just a distraction from what the real issues are. They want you over here paying attention to something that doesn't affects what is the percentage of transgender?
It's minuscule.
Yes.
I mean,
it's 0.05% of the populace.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they're robbing you blind. Right?
Well, here's the thing. Wait,
it's the same shit as the welfare queen. The GOP and the right, they have always been able to successfully find a scapegoat, and the media doesn't push back. The media goes along with it. And so again, and I think Stephanie has said this a number of times, and I totally agree. The right makes it an issue, and then we push back against it, and now all of a sudden
we're the ones talking about it all the time.
We're wrong.
Well, also, we're in a situation where they set the parameters of the conversation, and then we have to fight on the ground that they have established.
Yes,
right. And it oftentimes does not line up with the actual issue itself. And the example that I would give is in the case of trans people or trans kids in particular, is that anybody who transitions and then detransitions wasn't trans. And the problem isn't with trans people. The problem is with the medical establishment and the social architecture around it not paying attention to actual trans people and making a legit, like, stable, legal and personal structure, social structure for people who are actually trans. Because then there's too much room for them to go, well, it's a mental illness and it's, look at this person who did it and now they regret it. And therefore that's on trans people. I've said for the longest time, like, autogynephiliacs, which are men who get sexual pleasure from pretending that they have female genitals, are not trans people. They are any more than
Cross dressers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like transvestites, which were the initial ones. And there are, two different categories of transvestites: men who do it performatively as a cultural thing, and men who get sexual excitement at the idea of dressing in women's clothes. And both are fine, fetishists and performers.
Yeah, sure.
Neither are wrong, but never did it require the changing of pronouns or bathrooms or any of that kind of stuff. And the issue that we have in this society, and I think this is the burden that men are carrying for the men that commit sexual assault, and the society that protects them, like Donald Trump, like sports figures that that rape women and then get away with it and stuff like that. When those guys, most of the people who do that kind of stuff have multiple victims. The rest of men are blameless and normal in this situation. But we have to carry the weight of those people in all of our interactions, how we interact with women sexually, how we flirt, how we perform, talk to someone at work. Like, the rules in our society have been set by the worst standards of men, and on a terrible scale. And I would argue that is cascaded over into the trans issue, because it is not. No one is worried about trans men in men's sports. Nobody is worried about women who've transferred, who've transitioned to being trans men and end up in there, because there is no material physical difference that they have an advantage. But there is a material physical advantage that men have over women. It is one of our defining characteristics. It is also the reason we can't carry a baby to term, but it's, lung capacity, heart size, bone structure, all that kind of stuff after puberty never goes away. So the sports issue was where they were able to stick this crowbar in and wiggle it, as if all trans people, or even a majority of trans people, are interested in sports and not just living their own lives. And then you have, in this situation, what I would argue is autogynephiliacs, who are taking advantage of the fact that they can now go into a girl's dressing room, and trans people now have to bear the burden of that person who is not trans. That person is, for all practical purposes.
Where has this ever happened? I've never heard of that happening.
It's the biggest example is men who have been convicted of sexual assault in England, and in Scotland. There's been a few of them that have then claimed they were women and were put in women's prison and raped and assaulted women in those womenmen's prisons.
In prison, prison.
Yeah, right. But this is, again, you're talking about teenage boys as well. The issue is, by the way, the issue isn't even whether it happens or not. The issue is how Republicans view it through their own prism. Because if you'll recall, Mike Huckabee, when this issue first came out, he was like, if I knew all you had to do to be able to go in the girls' dressing room was throw on a dress, I'd have done it every single day of high school. Remember that? Okay,
he also used a peephole to watch women and girls when he was a kid in showers.
Exactly. So again, he is not trans. No one would argue that Mike Huckabee is trans or is anywhere near trans. However, if the legal structure was such that he could pretend.
Have you ever seen Sarah Huckabee and Sanders and him in the same room? Have we ever?
No, I have not. So yeah, that's a good point. But
and Sarah Huckabee may be the one you're talking about here.
Right, exactly. But
as a woman.
But for real.
Yeah.
It is up to us as a society to protect trans people with legitimate rules and laws and structures that protect them in the life that they live, and so that they can do so safely and without molestation themselves. And that's why you should be able to change your birth sex on your birth certificate. That's why, day-to-day, like, non-binary language should have nothing to do with whether someone is trans or not, because you have to set a legal standard. Otherwise, other people will take advantage of it. And the first person that does, now trans people have to bear the burden of the fact that BTK used to dress up in the female clothes of his victims and put on a white female mask and lay on the ground where he had buried them. And
yeah, but you know what? Honestly, go ahead.
Yes,
I don't know of any other stories. When I hear these people talk about and their fear that men are dressing up as women to go into women's bathrooms. When have you ever? I've never heard of that happening.
There's been a half a dozen. The Virginia governor's race was actually around a boy who was not trans, who took advantage of the rules and dressed up as a girl and went in there, but was not a kid who identified as trans at all. But because the rules were so broad, he was allowed to go in there. The laws, and that's what I'm saying. It's not.
Are you sure that wasn't just something that was made up? Because I've never heard of that. I'm not saying it's not true, but I've never heard of it. And mostly people that get assaulted in bathrooms are assaulted by men who wear men's clothing that go into a bathroom.
I totally agree. But
Right.
if the rules were so lax that all those men who assault women would have to do, and they couldn't be kicked out of the bathroom because they identify and that was the rule, you cannot ask them to leave. You cannot ask them so that they could just wait until the cops are gone because they're a woman in the bathroom and that's their standard. If you don't have the rules, again, this is not about trans rights in that moment. It is about our weakness as a society to not set standards that protect trans people legitimately. But by saying you should be able to say whatever, and you should be, self-identifying based on no standards or no transition or no, identification or none of that stuff. You leave it open to the Trumps of the world to act on real trans people. You leave that burden at their feet.
But let me tell you what happened, like to that woman in Massachusetts, who was a woman, and she was kind of butch, and she was using a restroom with her girlfriend, who was in a different stall, and all of a sudden they dragged her out of there because they thought she was a man. I mean, what is women supposed to do? Show their genitals to prove something? To prove, hey, I'm a woman.
Right.
Well, here's what I would say. She has in that situation, in theory, an ID that says this is my name, this is who I am, and my sex is on my license, right?
So she should have to be prepared to prove that she's a woman by showing her ID that says woman. I mean, nobody wants to be harassed like that.
Right.
I totally agree. But I would say this is that's a distraction from what the real issue is. What I'm saying is that we as a society have to set up a protection structure for trans people that can withstand that kind of an assault, because it's going to happen. Because in the areas where
that's done. But hell, how do you get that done when you're dealing with a Republican Party that, just like with Roe, just like with the welfare
vote them out
situation, right? And just what they're doing now, this is their thing that they feel they can win on, right?
I'll tell you how.
Vote them out.
You vote them out. The DNC has one job right now: turn red districts purple, purple districts blue. I don't want to hear about anything else. If there's a conservative Democrat who's on the fence about these things, or the way people are talking about, like Gavin, and he's not quite there yet. You'll recall that when Obama came in, he was for civil unions and he was against gay marriage, but it passed on his watch.
So was Bernie Sanders. So was Bernie Sanders, by the way.
Well, Bernie Sanders was
for unions. He was to the right.
And he was to the right of Hillary on guns, because Vermont is a very gun-friendly state, and he had to change his position on guns to stay elected. And if he didn't, you'd have a Republican in there, and how would they vote? So again, I'm not interested in the social architecture movements at all. I'm interested in politics. We need people in offices who vote with us the majority of the time, and then over time we try to build up a collective idea that everybody can get on board with, where we're moving towards progress for everybody. And if some of it's more incremental than others because it takes longer to plant those seeds and grow those trees, then that's life. And we can't just abdicate it because the Republicans are intransigent and they're bad people. So we'll just be the good people and they'll be the bad people, and it'll all be fight, fight, fight. That's never how it's worked. It never will be how it's worked.
No.
Everything is incremental. Everything takes constant gardening.
Well, can I say something though? Well, I think that as far as like economic policies, we have to be bold. As far as cultural issues, I see what you're saying, because it takes longer to get people to where we want them to be, right? And look at gay marriage.
Unfortunately, in the meantime, there's a lot of carnage. And I'm just going to say, I have spoken with, my Black friends. I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to speak for them. I'm going to say what they have said to me.
That's not a cultural issue, though.
Hold on. Let me just say something,
Okay.
Okay. And then I'm going to say as a woman, and I'm going to say as a mother of a trans kid. Every single one of those people in those groups, in those categories, just want to be left the fuck alone to live the way we want to live, and not have people.
Well, okay, I would say I agree, but That's the people around you, and that's a subset of a subset of a subset. And there are a lot of Latinos and there were a lot of black people who voted specifically on the trans issue this time because they didn't want men and women's sports, and they come from a more conservative background. I've always found it very ironic that the Republicans think that Democrats want to flood the country with Latinos from South America so that they're guaranteed some voters, when the vast majority of the people that now have been coming over the border in the last 10 years especially are the kind of people who can afford to pay a coyote $10,000 a pop for each of their family members. These are not migrant workers coming across the border. These are people who mean to be entrenched and stay and pull the ladder up behind them. And those folks are in large part pro-life Catholics, hardline conservatives, patriarchal family structures. And they absolutely don't think trans people should have rights. And they absolutely don't think a woman should be president. And that's what we ran up against. And that's a reality that again, there's this illusion that because that a majority can be bad in its generalities, that a minority is pure in its lack of generalities. That and in the case, that's what slapped us in the face in the last election, was that it wasn't that a bunch of white Karens came out and said, "Oh dear, trans girls, are trying to compete with my girl in sports," right? Because a lot of them are trad wives, don't want their girls in sports anyways. It's a they view it as a place to park your lesbian kid. They don't actually. They want their daughters like cooking and being cheerleaders and shit like that. Half of them don't even want them to have jobs.
Right.
They believe.
And then there's the other part of the, that population that, were able to be given cover with the ballot initiatives in the southern states that allow
that didn't help
to protect Roe or, reinstate Roe, but also to vote for Trump. So there's two.
Yeah.
And the black community is also conservative. What Republicans don't realize, they vote for Democrats, yes, but the majority of blacks didn't even want, they were, anti-gay marriage until Obama came along.
Right. Well, you could argue that it's still that way. It's way smaller. It's probably, you're talking 51-49 as opposed to 60-40 or 70-30, which is where, or 90-10, which is where it kind of was in the 90s, but it was for almost everybody. And again, it's how you ask the question. The polling is always a weird thing. But again, it was, if people in retrospect judged Obama and said, I can't vote for him because I believe gay marriage should be a legal thing, I certainly did, but I can't vote for him as a Democrat because he believes in civil unions, and that's not far enough. It's all or nothing. If we can't have everything, nobody gets anything. And if that's your strategy, that's what gives you Trump. That's what gives you George Bush. And you're like the guy they can have a beer with, or the outsider businessman illusion. They will go with that myth every time because they don't have to. And again, one of the things is they don't have to fear us. The Republicans don't fear us the way Democrats do. Democrats fear their own voters. The slacktivist class has no problem attacking Democrats. If you looked at the DNC, again, I brought this up on my show, but the DNC, when I went to the DNC, there were a bunch of people out there with Genocide Joe signs and all this shit, and none of them were out in front of Mar-a-Lago when Netanyahu was having his meeting with Trump. Exactly. None of them, not a one.
Oh my God, they weren't at the RNC. They weren't at the RNC. They were at the DNC. They weren't at the RNC.
Exactly.
And where are they now?
And this is why Republicans a lot of times aren't afraid of Democrats in the long run, because they know our voter base can get scared off easier than theirs.
Yep, easily manipulated. Like what happened at Dearborn.
Anita, if I can answer the question, where they are is they're showing up with big, heavy PA systems on the back of black pickup trucks with the Palestinian flag and professionally manufactured banners, showing up at the 50-51 rallies. And
tell Hal about that. What happened?
And this is what happened. Referring to Joe Biden as Genocide Joe, and chanting from the river to the sea, and not one mention about Genocide Trump or Don. Not one, nothing about that, right? And it's all like Trump is bad, but it didn't start with Trump. And then they go in and do this. And they were given they were given the mic at this rally, and then they were allowed to push in front of everybody that showed up. They lost 50-51 at that demonstration. It was on the 19th of April. They lost dozens and dozens of people that showed up to be at the rally in March with that. And but that's
that was the goal. Here's the thing. Like, you cannot look at what like Biden and Harris were doing, the conversations that they were having with Netanyahu, the limitation of weapons, the rules of engagement that they were putting on the use of weapons, the guaranteeing of supplies, and all these kinds of things. You look at that as anybody who would look at that and say Genocide Joe, and then look at Trump saying Trump Plaza Gaza. And we just got to, get rid of them. They're a cancer. You've got to solve the problem quickly. That kind of stuff, which is not something you say when you're worried about civilian casualties at all. It wasn't in a situation where it was 51-50. It was, 99-1. And the fact that anybody would come there and act like it was a coin flip says to me that they didn't really care about the issue.
Right.
I don't believe them. At one point, I was like, these people are deluded. These people are mistaken. These people are caught up in this. But I now believe that they actually were pro-Trump, and that many of them were, there are schisms in the Muslim world, just like there are schisms in Christianity and in politics all over the world. And there are a bunch of people who...
Misogyny. There was a lot of misogyny.
Well, there's also, there's also a lot of, like, Saudi Arabians would rather the Palestinians go away forever. Because they could normalize all kinds of stuff. Qatar, Oman, ultimately would like dovetail under Saudi Arabia, or Qatar and Kuwait would dovetail under Saudi Arabia. Iran would become less of a factor. The trade would go up through the Middle East. You could get rid of effectively the terrorist factions if if this one big Band-Aid just got ripped off. And there are a bunch of people in Michigan and other places who, while they are technically Arab, are a different kind of Arab. We've had, look at the Civil War in the United States. Not everybody who looks alike cares about other people who look just like them. And these folks, I'm convinced after a while, the Arabs for Trump that became the Arabs for peace, were actually there to broom the Palestinians. That they knew if Trump got in and they could get him in, he would let Netanyahu do this, and Trump would help him do it, and then they could get rid of this, and then billions could be made in trade and travel and all kinds of stuff, and screw the Palestinians. They've been a pain in the ass for too long, and their time is up. They had their shot and it's over. And that's it, because at a certain point, it's impossible to have the information we have and be that deluded.
Right. And what about Rashida Tlaib? What do you make of that? Because
she started the Genocide Joe thing.
Yeah.
Yes, right. I would argue that she is an example of a fringe candidate who's not really a Democrat. But again, I would take her as a Democrat over other people because she's going to vote for the budget the right way. She's going to vote with us 80% of the time. I have no concerns about Republicans or Democrats right now. I'm only concerned about Republicans. Again, the only job of the DNC, turn red districts purple and purple districts blue. I don't need to backbite any Democrat at all. If they're on board with, upwards of 85% of the Democratic agenda and what we're trying to get done, and their only disagreement most of the time is it doesn't go far enough, that's fine. We'll deal with that later. We'll start pairing people out when we have a 60-40 majority in the House and Senate. But until that day, we got a lot of work to do convincing people to vote the right way, and we got a lot of work to do turning red districts blue.
And luckily, the Republicans are doing a great job helping us get to that
right
point.
Now, yes. Agreed.
And the Democrats that are bashing other Democrats, though, those are a problem. And David Hogg, he's been a real problem.
Yes. Well, that's where I started this whole like red district, red districts purple, purple districts blue. This has got to be the rallying cry for the DNC going into 2026 and into 2028 and for the next decade, arguably. We have one job at the DNC: red districts purple, purple districts blue. That's the only way we're pushing right now. We don't need to swap out if there's a Democrat in there and they've got a secure seat and they know how to win in that district, they're going to vote our way most of the time. The idea that you're going to make a district bluer. This all started with AOC, who I like very much, but the impact vote-wise from her district is net zero.
Yeah.
The Green New Deal that she put forward was, as a mission statement, is great, but it was effectively like declaring National Ice Cream Day in terms of its legislative impact. It's one of those things. These are our goals, and we're going to vote on our goals and show them to the world, but they don't actually go into law. And that's and again, that's part of it. And I'm not downplaying it, but it wasn't like she passed some giant piece of legislation. Biden did that. The guy that they called Genocide Joe, the guy who strips all the lead pipes out of the school districts in Flint and that kind of stuff over the next 10 years. That's him. Right. So what happened with AOC's district, as far as the votes coming out of that district for everything that's been passed in Congress, it's been a wash. Mm-hmm. There's not a she's definitely, like people on our side like her. Maybe she's a great fundraiser. That's always helpful, that kind of stuff. But but swapping out somebody blue for blue is not going to land you anything, because the only thing it would ever do is put a holdout in. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing it would have. If David Hogg was successful and he put in like an arguably what he considers a progressive in, where somebody was more conservative Democrat, and the reason, if you could have a progressive in that seat, you would have had one already. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing, because you can't force that into a situation because the populace in there isn't ready yet. That is a blue-leaning purple district.
I have a perfect example. Henry Cuellar with Ortiz Jones
in Texas.
When she ran against him, and he's the only anti-choice Democrat in Congress, and she couldn't beat him. She ran against him twice, or maybe she ran against him twice, but she won both times because that district was not that progressive. Right. They just were not going to vote for.
And if you lose him, any Republican in there, even a moderate Republican, is going to vote with Trump 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what you get. And so, again, even running a primary in that situation is a waste of time. You save him. You've got plenty of votes. You don't need, if we're missing 3 votes on marriage rights or choice or something like that, we need to widen that margin. Mm-hmm. We don't need to swap out Dems that are in there. We need to start attacking districts where, the public is with us on this idea, and we need to transition this purple district blue. There are a bunch of them around there. That's where all the money should go. Democrats who are running in competitive districts should get a lot of support from the DNC. And if you're in a rock solid blue state, you shouldn't need any money at all. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And if you do, you're doing something wrong. So, the money has to flow to trending the direction towards a 60 vote majority in the Senate and a 60% majority in the House. That's 100% where it's going to go. And then we can start pairing people out.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think about this strategy, the 50 state strategy, or where we run somebody everywhere? Do you think that's a waste of money?
No, because here's the thing. You don't have to spend that much money. You'll get free publicity just being a Democrat running in half these, because nobody's ever run before. So some of these places you'll get local news and that kind of stuff. Yard signs aren't going to do it. And again, way heavy on volunteers. Use national phone banking as a way of doing it. You don't, find other ways, especially because the areas we're talking about, most of them are rural. So there aren't that many people in them to begin with.
And they also haven't heard a lot of Democratic ideas in those areas.
Right. Right. So it'll be novel at the very least, or they've heard national ones that don't fly in their area. So you got to, and again, if you're going to do that, you're going to run somebody who is, more in the middle of the road as a Democrat. And you can't just go like traitor and scream at them because they're not using the code words and the jargon, and they're not sticking to the script, because the script doesn't work there. And there is a political class in this country that is the equivalent of the ugly American yelling at a foreigner louder and louder because they think if they just yell louder in English, this person who speaks French will suddenly understand them. And that political class in our country around social issues and other stuff is an irritant online and completely useless for motivating voters. And again, I don't care about the social movements of it because the political part of it is where the real change happens. I don't give a shit if somebody is for gay marriage as long as the right exists. Mm-hmm. If you voted for it because it was part of a bigger bill and damn it, you want this other thing, and you need military spending for your district, and there was pork thrown your way to get you that way, and your opposition to it was smaller than your need for this particular part of the bill. I don't give a shit. I just want gay people to have their rights.
Well, in Congress, it's not as important. Yeah, it's not as important because you can maybe have individual districts that are more conservative. Well, the only way they can get elected is being further right on issues like that. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Senate, I'm not so sure because we only have
the Senate
so many senators.
Right. Well, in the Senate, we're, God bless him if he's going to bring in Canada, because it wouldn't be one state, it'd be three states.
I know,
and they would all be Democrats. Same thing with Puerto Rico. So
how about Greenland? Greenland would be blue too.
Sure, absolutely. And they'd want Greenland and Canada would both want national health care. So,
of course, they're not going to give that
up. that's why whenever he brought that up, it was a joke. It was always a distraction because every time he brought it up, there were people in there just going, no. No,
I know Republicans were like, no.
Yeah. The key, the key with the Senate is we've got to allow for the mansions and cinemas. Because if we don't, we're already weighted in the wrong direction. There are 50 states, and a bunch of them have less than 200,000 or 300,000 people in them, and they have 2 senators. And you've got, big blue states with lots of friggin' people,
like
tens
California
of millions of people, with 2 senators. Right. We're already up against the wall in that situation.
Real quick, though, Arizona is not the same as like West Virginia. Kristen Sinema, because Kelly, what's his name?
Mark Kelly. Yeah.
Mark Kelly. He voted along with the rest of the Democrats on a lot of those, those more progressive issues, and he was way more popular than her, and he got reelected. Kirsten Sinema couldn't even win in that primary.
Oh, so I agree.
That's why she dropped
out. That was a shift from the John McCain years to the current Arizona setup, and it was a toss up. She was making a political decision based on the fact that it looked like at one point that they were going to have a Republican governor, and it was razor thin in those areas. So her attempt to try to court the other side in the Maverick state was a political calculation. It just turned out to be a bad one, and she was bad at selling it. Plus, you're selling it to people. It's like Elon Musk and electric cars. He's ruined himself with his own audience, and she was trying to appeal to people ultimately, by the way, who just don't believe women should be in power. So that women will always have especially Democratic women, if they try to appeal to right wingers at all, they're skating uphill. They're ice skating uphill in a worse way than males. Male Democrats, because at least they're males. So when you can appeal to a Republican based on the fact that you're male. If you're a female, they already think you're weaker than that. They think male Democrats are weaker than male Republicans, but they definitely think women are too weak to be in office. Now, again, we can argue the absurdity of this till we're blue in the face, but this is absolutely where their head is at. So we just need to know that and prepare accordingly. And in the case where Mark Kelly, male astronaut, he can be to the left on these things, but he went to fucking space. And so, they're gonna look at him differently. And there's a lot of Latinos in that state. There's a lot of elderly people who don't think that, older folks in Arizona that went out there to dry out, their lungs, and they specifically believe that women shouldn't be in, they might be great in Congress or, even a mayor once in a while, but they belong nowhere near the presidency, and they certainly shouldn't be, in a situation where they might be in the Senate leadership and end up being president one day. They look at those things that way. And it's our job to convince them otherwise. We can chastise them all we want. But
when do you think we're going to nominate another woman again?
Oh,
I don't think it will be that long. It'll be like 2 cycles. But again, you have to wait till Gen Z cycles through, because but there is a right-wing shift in younger millennials that's really strong. So that will punt it an extra 4 years. It also depends on the woman, quite frankly. And I think there's a reality that if we'd have gone from Obama to Biden, we'd have gone from Biden to Hillary.
Yeah.
But I think in our success of getting, as Democrats, getting the first black man elected president, there was a bit of hubris, like America has changed forever and we're not going back, right? And that's, and apparently that progress is a lot more incremental than we would like to admit. And I've never had a problem with incremental progress, because I want it to stick. The worst thing you can have is kind of what we had with DACA, which is like you get it. He has to sign it with an executive order, but then these people are just hanging by a thread forever, and that's not him. That's not his fault. That's our fault. It was activists that pushed him to do this quickly.
But Hillary, honestly, she was seen as kind of a badass, and that's why she got 3 million more votes, and that's why Trump needed Russia's help to win that election.
Agreed. But again, I've said this a long time. So if only the people who were decrying the destruction of USAID and all kinds of social safety net things had cheered as loudly when they were created by Democrats. If only they had made as much noise applauding Hillary Clinton for S-chip, for example, which she almost personally shepherded through the entire governmental process, and the children's lives it saved, and it stood firm in protecting her against the lies told against her. Right. Yeah. It's still there. Even if Trump wants to get rid of it, even Tom Cotton and these guys aren't going to get rid of it because they can't.
They're not going to get rid of that.
And they're mad at her for doing it. They hate the program. They wish they'd never had it, but they know they can't get rid of it because it saves kids' lives in their own states. And if we had only applauded her as loudly as as we decried the destruction of the social safety net, or had stood by her as strongly, when she was being vilified.
I know. No, because she's a woman.
We wouldn't be in this mess.
There are a lot of Democrats that, because she's a woman, and even in the Democratic Party, there's a lot of misogyny. I'm going to ask you. Let me ask you a question. I know it's kind of a non sequitur, but all this destruction. You mentioned USAID. All this destruction that's happening right now, as far as just gutting the government, gutting these departments, how are we ever going to fix that? And how long is that going to take?
Well, okay, so a good portion of the USAID was folded under the State Department. So a lot of the funding is still there. They cut some of the DEI stuff, and they cut stuff that was very, flashy and had to deal with trans rights and stuff to satisfy some of their dipshits.
But hiring all those people back. How are we going to hire good people back like that?
Well, again, there are a couple of answers to that. But the primary one being is that a lot of the bigger programs still exist under there, and they are quietly putting them back in place. Trump is tacoing all over the place, and he's doing it under the radar. That's why spending is still up, because they're funding these things on the down low because they need to do it because it's necessary, and they know it is. And the ones they call rhinos on television are constantly telling them, like, yeah, you can't cut this. This is going to mess us up in the Middle East. It's going to allow China into this country. They're telling them that, and they're reacting to it. They're actually Marco Rubio is under the radar, like messing around, like sending all this funding through. And there's like a gentleman's agreement that they don't call him on it too much in the Senate, so that it doesn't draw the attention of Trump's MAGA base, and they go, wait, they're not cutting this funding at all, right?
I heard they're doing it with Ukraine too.
Yes.
Like on the down low.
Well, the Ukraine funding was in the CR. The CR was passed as is, so the money that is legally has to go out the door comes from Biden's budget, and that was in Biden's budget. And guess what? They're pretty close to having to pass the same CR in September. They're not going to have they're going to have a budget. They don't, this big, beautiful bill nonsense. They're not going to pass it yet either. And if they do, again, it'll be stripped down like crazy, and they'll never be able to get to a budget. And the only thing they'll be able to do is put themselves up against a wall. The government's going to shut down. Their only option will be to vote on a CR because they'll collapse the economy, and and we're already going to have our back against the wall because of the tariffs and all this other crap, creating so much volatility. So they'll pass it again, because he doesn't want to cut spending. This is a lie. He wants to spend like crazy while he's in there.
Well, I know that, of course. Yes, he's the king of debt.
Right. Sure. So a lot of this money has to go out the door and make everything look like, wow, we cut all this stuff, but it's still running just as well. Now, is he going to do damage? Yes. I'm not saying he isn't. But what I am saying is that a lot of the damage that he's doing can be turned around relatively quickly if and when, Democrats take over the House or the Senate or both in the midterms. And certainly that it's so bad, it's so distinct that after, if God willing, a Democrat wins in 2028, and I know they will. I'm right. I feel very strongly about this. But in 2028, the world will go, okay. Like, you look at, I almost think there's almost ready to have a Russia in 1991 moment where it's just this flood in of like, okay, everything's cool again. And because that's what the Democrat is going to have to run again. Like American leadership, American partnership.
Repairing look at the Medicaid cuts. I mean, and they're not set to go into effect till 2029. So a Democrat's going to have to come in there with overwhelming majorities and fix that and
But they'll be able to run on that fact that they lit this fuse to cut Medicaid, and if we don't fix it, it's and the Republicans won't. So they basically have given a gift. That's in true. 2028, when the election is going on, the Democrat will be able to run on the fact that like they lit this wick 3 years ago, if it even passes. But let's say that it did. They lit this wick 3 years ago, and this bomb's going to go off next year, and he's not going to fix it, or she's not going to fix it, whoever they run. But I will. Democrats will turn this around. We'll take those Medicaid cuts out. And we will shore up our protection for the states that are the most vulnerable, many of them red states, and not let them, leave them hanging while, eliminating tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires, which most people are for. Like that's a great thing for Democrats to run on and an easy lift for anybody running. It's not even that controversial. So I feel like by punting this, it's like the tax cut too. The tax cut that they're putting in this thing is temporary as well. Because if they wanted to make it permanent for real, they have to get 60 votes. They want to do this with reconciliation, so it can only be to the end of his term. So that's the issue that they're up against. And what they're hoping to run on is if we don't win, these tax cuts are going to come on, because that was part of what he thinks helped him get in. It wasn't. It was all like immigration and trans issues and scare. It had nothing to do with the tax issue. Most people weren't even aware that their taxes changed all that much, and it didn't affect the middle class hardly at all. It was really the upper. And by the way, this bill, the reason he wants it to pass isn't because he wants to make, extend his tax cuts from before. It's because he's adding all these big business tax cuts where you can basically write off everything. So if you're a corporation, you can write off a yacht because you take people out on the yacht, and you can write off an entire golf course because you make deals on the golf course. Like that's what's in this bill. That's the big expenditure, and that's why they have to raise the debt ceiling $5.3 trillion.
And the Democrats proposed keeping the middle class tax cuts, but allowing tax cuts to allowing it to expire for the millionaires and billionaires. People over a certain income.
And the corporate tax cuts, because again, you can, if you want to do, precise developmental R&D based tax cuts, especially in a tech era like this, where everybody's having to like up tech all their stuff, then do it, like make it an AI tax cut, as everybody has to modify their business. That would sell, and it would be a lot cheaper ultimately in the end than people think, because by the time it came around, AI is, look, I've said this on my Friday Eye show repeatedly, but it's a material fact that all technology is deflationary. Technology
I've heard you say that.
Always gets faster and cheaper. It is by its nature. And in the long run, the AI companies are effectively billionaires putting themselves out of business, because there is, right on the horizon, there is a zero labor, $0 future that's possible, where all of our costs we're expecting in the future that we budget for are going to evaporate. Because of automation, because of like resources, advances in material sciences, and the technology around science, medical science, because of AI and those kind of things, we're looking at an exponential shift in our societal experience that's very much akin to the printing press and the internet, and how different life was before and after that, but in a way that affects healthcare and material sciences, making it cheaper and more widely available than anything we've ever seen before. And that the weird part is that's going to happen. That's going to really start to happen during Trump's term. It's going to start affecting the job market in a huge way. The negative impacts of it are going to happen first. It will even itself out over time. But there are going to be a ton, like unemployment is going to be a major issue in the next presidential cycle. Huge.
There's
in the white collar and upper middle class zone of things, not just physical labor jobs being put out of, like people being put out of business because they work in construction or stuff like that because of 3D printing of homes and stuff, right? Manufacturing. Well, I mean, all the factories Trump says he's going to bring home don't have any people in them.
Yeah, I
They've
know.
got half a dozen people.
That's true.
They're vending machines.
I know he keeps talking about all these investments that, by the way, a lot of them were from Biden, but they're like Microsoft or something, and they're not going to have a lot of people in them working in them.
Right.
Yeah, and not to mention a lot of manufacturing is not coming back here. That's never going to happen.
Right.
Right.
Go ahead.
Listen, I mean, we're kind of running out of time here. I have to go back and start paying my bills. But
yeah, I tend to yammer.
No. This
it was good.
Great. And I mean, see, this is the thing, Hal. I mean, just listening to you, it's like there is so much. I realize there's so much I don't know.
I enjoy the optimism too, because
I do too.
That.
I mean, and Anita and I have often said that, when we listen to your show, it's like, you have a way of informing and also making, kind of coming at things and at
a positive
angles, right? And giving perspectives that I think are much needed, because you're right. This is so complex. Everything that we're having to deal with. And everything that's being thrown at us. And, I mean, I am still like, when Donald Trump is over here throwing stuff at the wall or whatever, and people are like, can you believe he said this? I'm like, look over here. Because all I can see is Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and
Pelletier or whatever.
And
Pelletier, yeah.
So it's like, it's just kind of getting people to understand that the noise is just noise. We have to be really, really careful and aware of what this is supposed to distract us.
But it's not just noise. Some of the stuff he's doing, like having this.
But I mean, it's not going to be as consequential as what these other people are doing to us. Right.
And also, here's what I would like to say. If you feel a lot better if you focus on the material impact that you can have. And so if the problem is, most people feel like watery about whether they're going to vote for Democrats next time around, somewhere in the back of their head, even if they know they aren't. And it's very weird, but you can eliminate a lot of anxiety if you just go, I've drawn my line and I know what side of the bread the butter goes on. And I'm not worried about this at all. Then you can focus on the things that where you can be helpful in your community in the interim between elections. But it's this kind of who are we going to vote for? How is this going to go? Look, there's such a huge difference between Democrats and Republicans right now. It's not even a choice. It's obvious. And you're, I think personally, communism is ridiculous. I think, socialism is stupid. And Social Security is not socialism, it's democratic taxation. We as democratic people who have control over how our taxes are spent have decided we want a system that protects people in their old age. That's not socialism, that's democratic taxation, and there's nothing wrong with calling it that, and there's nothing to be ashamed about it doing it. But if Bernie Sanders was running, would I blink an eye about voting for him? Of course not. Right. Because by comparison, I'm not worried about him doing something terrible, and I think his judgment in an emergency would be so much more valuable than any Republican that's out there who's a macho dickhead who's got daddy issues. So I don't even bat an eye about it. I don't have that. I don't fret about that at all. I feel like there's a lot of fretting on our side about who are we going to vote for? Who are they going to run? Who gives a shit? We know we're going to vote for them because they're going to be fine. No. And by comparison, they're going to be, the other side is going to be terrible. But in the meantime, if you want to put your effort towards something and your concern towards something, it can be towards charity or social protection or volunteering someplace. And when you do that, you put your time into that stuff, it also takes that weight away because you're making an impact.
Well, listen, we got to wrap it. But thanks again, Al. This was
Thank you, Al. I'm so glad you showed up.
So much
and informed us about so many different things. And
seriously. And, the fact that, I know that you drove to LA for your Queer as Folk reunion and event, and then you drove back, and then you were navigating all these audio and technical difficulties. So seriously, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Carving out a little bit of time.
I got 3 hours sleep. I'm good.
You're good.
Is there going to be a Queer as Folk reunion show?
Yeah.
No, not in the near future.
But there was
but we
something
had
that people could log into, right?
we had a Queer as Folk, like, they watched an episode and then we spoke about it afterwards, and we spoke about our experience on the show and to an audience for Pride. Yeah, it's going to be a yearly thing. A lot of people did. I'm trying to, I think they filmed it and they're going to send me a copy. I'm hoping.
Okay.
Okay. Because they did that with Friends, where they actually were, sitting around talking.
Right. That was the Emmy one, though. This is different. This was for Pride. So this is their first time doing it. So I feel like they'll learn eventually. I did get little videos of me with everybody in the cast who were there. And so I'll post those because I promised to do that.
Cool.
So I've got these little, we just shot little videos while I was there.
Well, looking forward to that. And again, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And I'll catch your show like I always do tomorrow, 11 o'clock Central Time, WCPT.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Hal. Take care.
Great
Stay
day.
cool.
Stay
Bye.
Bye.